Alright, class. Today, we're going to explore into something fundamental to all living cells, the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER. Now, I know that might sound a bit technical, but stick with me and you'll see how important and cool this organelle really is. You see, cells have a lot of parts or organelles, each with its own special job. The ER is one of those organelles that plays a huge role in how the cells functions. We're going to break down the two types of ER, rough and smooth. By the end of this lesson, you'll know how they differ, what they do, and why they're so important to the cell. So let's get started. First things first, let's define what the endoplasmic reticulum is. The ER is a network of membranes inside the cell, and it's involved in several key processes, mostly protein and lipid production and transport. It's a bit like a factory inside the cell where raw materials are processed and shipped to where they're needed. The ER is connected to the cellular or the nuclear envelope, which is the outer membrane of the nucleus, and it stretches out into the cell's cytoplasm. So it's kind of like a bridge between the nucleus, where the genetic material is, and the rest of the cell. The ER's main job is to help produce things the cell needs, like proteins or fats, and move them around. We'll get into the details of how this works in a moment, but for now, just know that the ER is crucial for keeping the cell running smoothly. Again, here are the two types of endoplasmic reticulum or ER, rough ER and smooth ER. Now let's talk at one half of the ER, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, also called RER. You can tell the difference between rough and smooth ER by looking at them under a microscope. The rough ER has ribosomes attached to its surface, which gives it a bumpy or rough texture. These ribosomes are tiny machines that make proteins. So what does the rough ER actually do? Its main function is protein synthesis. You can think of the rough ER as the factory that makes proteins. The ribosomes on its surface read instructions from the cell's DNA and assemble amino acids into proteins like building blocks being put together. But it's not just about making proteins. The rough ER also plays a role in modifying and transporting these proteins. Once the proteins are made, they need to be folded into the right shape and packaged for delivery to where they're needed, in the cell or outside of it. Certain cells are packed with rough ER because they need a lot of protein. For example, pancreatic cells make insulin, which is a protein hormone, and they rely heavily on the rough ER. Similarly, muscle cells need lots of proteins for growth and repair, so they also have a lot of rough ER. Now let's talk about the smooth endoplasmic reticulum or SER. Unlike the rough ER, the smooth ER doesn't have ribosomes, so it looks smooth under a microscope. The smooth ER is involved in lipid synthesis, which means it helps create fats, oils, and other important molecules like phospholipids, which make up cell membranes. But the smooth ER does more than just make lipids. It also helps in detoxification, If there are harmful substances in the cell, like drugs or alcohol, the smooth ER helps break them down and get rid of them. That's why the liver cells, which detoxify our bodies, have a lot of smooth ER. Another important function of the smooth ER is to help with the storage and regulation of calcium ions, which are super important for muscle contraction and other cell activities. So, if you're thinking about muscle cells, the smooth ER helps make sure there's the right amount of calcium when the muscle needs to contract. Now that we know what the rough and smooth ER do, let's take a closer look at how they differ in structure, function, and where they're found in the body. Let's discuss first about the structure. Rough ER. The rough ER is called rough because of the ribosomes attached to its surface. These ribosomes are like tiny factories where proteins are made. Imagine these ribosomes as workers on an assembly line, reading genetic instructions and building proteins one piece at a time. The rough texture you see under a microscope is directly caused by these ribosomes. On the other hand, the smooth ER looks smooth under a microscope because it doesn't have ribosomes attached to it. This gives it a more even appearance. Without ribosomes, the smooth ER doesn't focus on protein production. Instead, it's involved in other vital processes like, again, lipid synthesis, detoxification, and calcium storage. The difference in structure is a big clue about their functions. The rough ER is specialized for tasks that require ribosomes. On the other hand, the smooth ER, which lacks ribosomes, is more focused on metabolic processes related to lipids and detoxification. Now let's move to their difference in terms of function. The rough ER is again required for protein synthesis and modification. The rough ER's main job is to help make proteins. The ribosomes on the rough ER read the genetic instructions in the cell's DNA and use them to assemble proteins from amino acids. Think of it as the protein assembly line of the cell. Once the proteins are made, the rough ER helps fold them properly into their final shapes and modifies them if needed. For example, some proteins need sugar molecules attached to them. This is called glycosylation to function correctly. These proteins might be used in the cell itself or shipped out of the cell to perform functions elsewhere, like enzymes in the digestive system or hormones like insulin. Next is the smooth ER. It is needed for lipid synthesis, detoxification, and calcium storage. The smooth ER is involved in the production of lipids, fats, oils, and phospholipids. These lipids are essential for building and maintaining the cell membrane, which surrounds every cell. The smooth ER also makes hormones that are made of lipids. For example, steroid hormones like estrogen or testosterone are synthesized in the smooth ER. Detoxification is another major function of smooth ER. It helps break down toxins like drugs and alcohols into less harmful substances. This is particularly important in liver cells where the smooth ER works overtime to neutralize toxic substances. Another important task of the smooth ER, again, is to store and regulate calcium ions. Calcium is a crucial ion involved in many processes, including muscle contractions. When muscle cells need to contract, the smooth ER releases calcium to trigger this process. This is why muscle cells have a lot of smooth ER to help with calcium regulation. Then lastly, the location in cells. Rough ER in cells that produce proteins. Cells that produce a lot of proteins have a large amount of rough ER. Think about pancreatic cells which produce insulin, a protein that regulates blood sugar. These cells need a lot of ER to make insulin and other proteins. Another example is muscle cells, which also need tons of proteins for growth and repair, so the rough ER is highly developed. Rough ER also starts from the nuclear envelope. The rough ER is also found in cells that are part of secretory systems or cells that are heavily involved in protein production. This is why immune cells that produce antibodies also have large amount of rough ER. Smooth ER, on the other hand, is found in cells that are involved in lipid metabolism, detoxification, or calcium storage. For example, liver cells, adrenal gland cells which produce steroid hormones also have a lot of smooth ER to help make these fat-based molecules. To recap, the rough ER is most common in cells that need to produce the transport of proteins, while the smooth ER is found in cells that focus on lipid production, detoxification, or managing calcium levels. Let's look at some examples where rough and smooth ER play a big role in real life. In muscle cells, the smooth ER is crucial for storing and releasing calcium ions which control muscle contractions. If there is a problem with a smooth ER in muscle cells, it can affect movement and strength. On the other hand, cells that make a lot of proteins like the pancreas, which make insulin, have tons of rough ER. So to wrap up, the endoplasmic reticulum, both rough and smooth, is essential for the cell to function properly. The rough ER focuses on producing and transporting proteins, while the smooth ER is busy making lipids, detoxifying harmful substances, and regulating calcium. Together, they help the cells stay healthy and keep everything running smoothly. So next time you think about how a cell works, remember that the ER is like a factory inside it, doing a lot of important work to keep the cell going strong. See you in the next module. Bye bye.